Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, joint hosted by ISquared and Fortinet. My name is Michael Carroll, and I'm an account manager with ISquared based here in the Pacific Northwest. Today, we'll be presenting about the latest rounds of federal aid available to those in the K12 space and how those funds can be applied to additional remote or hybrid learning, networking, or security initiatives. I'd like to introduce you today to today's speaker, Jeff Jennings, who is currently Fortinet Senior SLED Director. Jeff has an immense wealth of knowledge to share with us coming from his nearly 20 years of experience working inside and out with K12 school districts. We'll be recording today's webinar, and the recording will be available following the presentation. That link will be distributed to yourself from our ISquared and Fortinet teams. Lastly, we'd love to hear from our attendees. Please post any and all questions into the chat window, and we'll be answering at the end of our presentation. If we run out of time, I'll make sure to answer all questions via email. Thank you again for joining us, and without further ado, here's Jeff.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, and especially around spring break for everybody that has tuned in. And there's a lot to talk about, and it's by and large very good news for all of the public sector, but specifically for K-12 and higher education, but in the third round also for state and local government. So it's a good time to get this conversation started. So we're going to talk a little overview about everything you see on the page here. We're going to go into some greater depth in some lesser in others, because frankly, there's a ton of information. And what many people don't realize, especially on the education side, there's actually been 3 tsunami waves of funding come through. ESSER 1, or people call it CARES 1, CARES 2. For K-12, it's ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. And then now just allowed February 27th was ESSER 3, which is the American Rescue Plan. And then higher education has the same thing, except theirs is called HERE, Higher Education Emergency Relief. So you're going to hear about that, a little bit about the governor's discretionary fund, and then a little bit of E-rate, but E-rate wrapped up, so everybody can say hallelujah about that. That just wrapped up on the 25th. And SLED, so public sector by vertical, this was before the pandemic, what was the projected spending and what was the funding that was going to be available in each market. And this is good to see, because the difference now is education had 28.8. Well, you've got about 7 times that amount of money right now between the CARES Acts and in the other sectors as well. So for the first time in decades, in fact, this is the most money ever infused with the pandemic since World War II, and it outclassed post-World War II funding by a factor of at least 15x. So it's the biggest infusion ever. By the way, this is just the start. There's going to be the infrastructure plan, additional funding coming on the public sector side. And all this is coming on the heels of the cybersecurity trends and challenges. K-12, higher ed, state and local government, all have had to do a hyper pivot to a digital transformation that was expected to take 10 years, and you had to do it in a matter of months. And so if you've ever heard or read The Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt in 1910 in Paris, France, that's where you are. And if you haven't read it, please do so, because you're in the arena. You're doing what people have never done before. And in fact, on the education side, because of the new pedagogy and the new delivery method, we've seen a record number of people leave the industry, leave that sector, and you're surviving and you're learning to thrive in the middle of this pandemic and of the hyper transformation. So kudos to you for staying in the arena. But you've got every issue you've got to do here. Well, the CARES funding is all 3 rounds. Technology is written into all 3 rounds for K-12 and higher ed. The state and local government, round 1 and round 3, there was nothing in round 2. That went to the stimulus package. So there's definitely funding, although it funds a different way than you are familiar with, and by and large. So we need to talk about becoming advocates, because education cannot function right now without the hybrid remote learning and working network. And that is not going to go away. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But the key in higher ed, it's very similar. You've got a reactive risk, you've got insider threats, And also, higher ed and K-12 are in the top 5 for cyber attacks. So you are a prime target, and you're being hit every day. Now, this is the K-12 Cyber Incident Map. You can Google it or go to cybersecurity, K12cybersecurity.com. They keep a running total. Before the pandemic last March, there were 743 successful incidents. Since February, they haven't updated the map because, frankly, there's been too many, and they try to qualify and get all the information. So talking with them the other day, they believe there's at least 1,245 now, and they're hopefully going to be updating the map soon. They've just been overwhelmed. So if you go to the map, it's very good. You can focus in on your state, into your region. You can see if it's happened to you, unfortunately, it'll give that information. And by the way, it's underreported because they use public sources. So we know for a fact there's been others that are not reported on here, and that's just K-12. So 743 before, we know we're well into the 1,200s now in a year. So what's going on, there was CARES 2 was December 27th. The original CARES was last March. The E-rate window is now closed, which everybody's happy about that. And then now, by the way, I need to take that out. It was signed in February. Now this money is rolling in, $165 billion in the education, K-12, 130. By the way, higher ed ended up getting 139. They actually were able to move, or 39. They were actually able to move some monies. It's been a moving target since the legislation has passed. One thing that is clear with all the dedication of funding, for education, hybrid learning is the next normal, the continued normal, and everything you're dealing with, both on the teachers and administration side, having to deal with flexible schedules, health and safety, the distancing, adaptive learning tools, blended learning, the personalization issues, face-to-face, remote, all of that is a brand new pedagogy nobody was ready for. Even if you were doing some remote learning before, it was never to the degree it is now. And so the good thing is, the lemonade from this is it's going to reinvigorate education. It's going to cause what I call AAA. They're assessing and they're adapting and acting. And so those 3 A's are going to allow for even more technology tools to be able to assist you. But also, frankly, once we get this nailed down, I think it's going to create more of an individualized learning experience for students. We're a long way from that right now. We're just trying to survive and get through and keep our children in the educational mode and learning. We can't leave them behind, and that's the big issue. So whether we want it or not, hybrid learning is not going away. And in fact, we're going to slowly, right now, everybody's got better practices because they're trying to find better practices. Best practice requires time, success, and repetition. And so we're not quite there with best practices, but we're going to talk about some better practices. The great thing we're going to talk about in the pandemic are the 4 buckets of funding. I'm mostly going to talk about education on this slide. So ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 was K-12. So ESSER 1, by the way, most of that money has not been spent. And I know you will hear from administrators and some of the IT team, well, we're not allowed to get that funding. And then you now got ESSER 2, which is starting to flow into the schools. And because ESSER 1 you've had for a long time. And then the American Rescue Plan is coming on that. So again, the 3 tsunamis. Then you've got E-rate that for 2021 that just closed. That's like the cavalry coming in at the end of the movie after everything's been done. However, we're going to talk about how you can accelerate that for your E-rate projects to move them in using CARES money as well. But overall, the bucket for the $1.9 trillion breaks down for state and local, such as you see above. It's going to be a combination of running through different formulas, FEMA, the federal Justice JAG formula grants, down through the states and counties through various entities. So it flows like a spider web down into each entity. Education is much more straightforward. It's based on the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and it's for K-12 and for higher ed, it's based on your Pell Grants. and a formula based on what you receive in Pell Grants. So again, a lot of money is flowing, and this is just one bucket, the latest bucket. Most of you have not even addressed or spent bucket 2, ESSER 2, or CARES 2, and you're still trying to spend down, for the vast majority, CARES 1. There's actually sites on the internet through the Department of Ed where you can track what was assigned and who got what. They're behind because everybody's trying to keep just the business of education flowing, much less try to get all the state and federal reporting done. So that's why I say you're in the arena, you, the administrators, the teachers, all the stakeholders, the students and the parents. One thing you need to be aware of is technology was purposely written into all 3 bills for state and for higher education and K-12. So for K-12, provide students with computers and other digital devices and internet access. And we're going to talk more on how it also connects about the connectivity and everything you need to be able to allow distance learning to happen. So this was one of the additions for K-12. The problem is, and frankly, it's a big problem, only 39% of education, K-12, higher ed, and state and local have spent any of their first round of funding on technology. 61% of you have not used CARES, despite the fact that it's written into the law in that very first CARES in section 18003 for K-12, section 18004 for higher education, and then also written in under the state and local government various subsections as well. So if you are not receiving any monies or you have not become an advocate to go ask for those monies, we're going to talk about how to do that. But if you are not getting anything for your network, if you're not expanding beyond just buying devices, you're leaving money on the table that must be spent. And state and local government, by the way, $350 billion. They absolutely can use it for supporting telework, digital services, broadband infrastructure, modernization, security. So that's state and local. It's the same with K-12. And by the way, there's a shot clock on all of this. So we know ESSER 1, they extended it to September 30th, 2022. That is the absolute drop-dead deadline for your CARES 1 or ESSER 1 funding. And as we're going to talk about in a minute, most of you have not spent that money down, despite what many think have, that it has not. ESSER 2 has to be spent by September 30th, 2023. ESSER 2 is over four times what you got in ESSER 1, CARES 1. And the new plan, ESSER 3, CARES 3, the American Rescue Plan, is 8 times what you got in the first round. And I'm going to show you a graphic example of that and why you need to start planning to use this for technology as it is written in the law. And it gives you wide latitude to do so. And with the shot clock, what we don't want to see happen, and back in the 1800s, I was an adaptive PE teacher, special ed, football coach, and then became an administrator. And I had to deal with Title I, all the entitlements on the ESEA side. And one of the things that would happen with many of our sites is they would not spend all their money, and then at the end of the year, panic buy to make sure we didn't give any money back to the feds. We don't want to have that happen with these one-time monies. So we need to understand these deadlines. By the way, ESSER 3, the latest, it is showing September 30th, 2023 as well, although there's already discussions to possibly extend that to 2024. And I hope they do, because what I would hate to see happen is have that second and third wave right on top of you, and you're not able to plan and spend that money that would best help your district. And I'm not talking about technology taking the whole thing. I'm talking about 10 to 20 to 35% of the total budget. And we'll talk about more about that in a minute. But purchasing education technology, absolutely allowed. And 90% of the allocation that was sent down has to go to the LEA. So it has to go to your district. Wisconsin and Texas do it through sub-grants from them down. Everybody else, it flows down straight like it would Title I at the beginning of the year, but you have to fill out an application. Your business offices, if they have not done so, absolutely should. But by now, those should all be in. but purchasing education technology, and it's vague on purpose. It's not E-rate with an eligible services list. Please do not think of this money as E-rate. They're not even running in parallel tracks. It's complete separate funding that is 100% federal funding, and there's no local match. E-rate, as we all know, there's a local match, but we're going to talk about a strategy about that. But education technology, everything that's required to enable that is eligible. Here's an example. I had to kind of force it into this slide, so it's ugly. But here's an example of just the top districts by alphabetical from the state of Washington. You can see in the CARES Act, these are the estimates. By the way, we have found them to be well within 5% accurate of the actual release numbers. So Aberdeen School District in their first round, 1.3. CARES 2, 5.2, and the new American Rescue Plan, 10.4, for a total of $17 million. Elmira does not get a lot of Title I because it's all based on Title I Part A, so they get much smaller numbers, but they still get some funding. And there are some like Bent, whatever that school district is with the zeros, that means they have no Title I. Auburn has a large amount of Title I. You can see 3.8, 14.6, 29 for a total of 47. So these funds are either there or flowing very quickly. And we're not saying technology should get all of it, but easily, if you look at Aberdeen, we're going to talk about a justification. We're asking for, at minimum, 10% would be 1.7 million to the technology side for all the technology. And frankly, there's justification for 20 to 35% of these budgets. So this is just a sample, and you can see at the bottom of the slide, Washington is actually farther ahead than most. The one who almost spent all of their money in K12 has been Iowa. You're at 44%, and most of your neighbors in the 20s are the teens. And remember, there's a shot clock on this for September 30th, 2022, and that was only after the extension. These monies need to be spent. This money needs to be used for all of the 15 areas of wide latitude that we'll talk about in a moment. But you can see the numbers. These are one-time monies that you absolutely, the ed tech, the IT team needs to be involved and needs to be going forward with a plan and getting your share. And so to do that, you need to be an advocate because you've relied on your budget, maybe bonds, and E-rate. And this money flows a completely separate way. They have wide latitude. It's local procurement, local spend. So it's only your local team that really makes the decisions, and the oversight is between your school district and the State Department of Ed. It's not like the rabies shots that you have with E-rate, with the PIA selective review, the audits, etc. So it's much, much cleaner, much more easy to use, and they want you to spend it and infuse it in the right way to support education. Higher ed, same way. So 22.7, this was the second round dedicated to colleges and universities. They're just now starting to spend it. They actually did a good job of trying to get the money out in round one. However, $6 billion was not used in the first round because, as you can see the different levels there were actually 8 different applications, and most schools got their students taken care of because, let's say a school got $20 million, $10 million went to student relief. A separate application would give the university $10 million to use for institutional relief, as in PPE and taking care of the school and jump starting and providing distance education, remote education, and working. So $6 billion was left behind. They have pivoted, and those that have it have been spending it at a good rate. But the same thing needs to happen in round 2 and round 3. So there is absolutely funding. Here's an example of round 2. Round 2, it was roughly half and half, but it was actually a little less. I don't know why they changed the formula for that act. It was kind of silly. But you can see that with the allocation total, University of California, Berkeley, for example, $30.2 million, 15 went to the students. Just realize roughly that same amount is for the institution, you need to use it. Because if you don't claim it, if you don't use it, the feds will take it back and you will have lost out on $15 million or whatever the number is. By the way, for higher education, it includes all Pell Grants. So beauty schools, massage schools, acupuncture, tech schools, junior colleges, all of them are getting funding. So same as in higher ed, you can use the money associated with the transition to distance education. That's spelled out in the bill. And that's spelled out in all three bills. So again, you can definitely use it for technology. You can use it for 15 other areas of wide latitude that I mentioned. We won't go into those because frankly, that is readily available. And what we're focused on now is making sure in the middle of this hyper transformation in a pandemic that you're getting the funding you need for your IT and ed tech growth and to support and secure and future-proof your network, grow it where you need to be. There's also a discretionary fund from the governors in round 3. There's $2.5 billion that have to go to private schools. That's done through a formula grant. What that means is it's going to go to the schools that have the lowest, that serve the lowest income. So private schools are getting a fraction of the funding, but it's not a lot. So, and that's going through the GERF, which is the governor's emergency relief fund as well. And that is a discretionary fund. The first 2 rounds, however, in the third round, they have to put a portion of it into private schools. So that's 2.5 of the $4 billion that they received. Also new, bridging the digital divide. So they gave money towards the E-rate program for bridging the digital divide and bringing that home. That's still being worked out. ISSQUARED and ISSQUARED and ourselves are both involved at this level and on the national level with Shelby and COSIN and up in the Beltway, where we're involved with how this is being put together. So right now the FCC is putting together the review and comments that are due, I believe, next week. That's being worked on right now. So pretty soon you'll be a separate window, but basically it's going to be $50 per month to a student to defray the cost, but they're now reworking that within the FCC to try to make it more useful and attractive. Also, there's a lot of lobbying behind the scenes, but we already know 350 service providers have signed up to be a part of this separate bridge of the digital divide. So also in excess, $300 million to expand internet service to rural areas. That definitely hits the Northwest. And in addition, by the way, yes, they eliminated $3 billion from the E-rate total, but they still have it. It's actually 7.6. But there's what's called the secret fund. There's a separate rural broadband fund of $10 billion that is sitting within the Department of the Treasury that rural and underserved areas are going to be able to go after as well. So if you've got an issue with being able to provide access to your homes of your students, this bill is definitely going to help that. There's also, we're looking at long-term, what many are calling possibly Category 3, because that's going to be important for the schools are going to be basically the anchor points that are going to identify who has the needs. Also, possibly expanding to allow Wi-Fi access to be broadcast to the neighborhoods. A lot of things are still being developed at the FCC right now, and we're on weekly calls with that. Top 10, what we're seeing being used in education right now, by the way, state and local government as well. Number 11 is switches, which is coming up fast. But for the end user, for securing, because you still have SEPA filtering and you still have FERPA securing of K12 data. So you've got to be able to secure those devices, and having that end user protection. Our EMS, EDR for Chromebooks and EDR for laptops. Anyway, all of that is blowing up huge. We're getting those. We have exceeded what we originally projected because the need is so far by 140%. Port extender, the APs, the tokens for secure for teleworkers, two-factor authentication is crucial, because with the broadened deployment out to the home, it's also broadened the attack surface. So we're starting to see people getting phished and attacked at home, especially if they don't have a secure network. So there's all kinds of issues there. And then voice with teachers unions, teachers, as many of you know, if you don't have it in the contract for compensation, many of the teachers and administrators have had to use their own cell phones, home phones, without getting compensated for it, and that's caused a problem. What we've seen in a massive way grow is our FortiVoice, where they're throwing on soft phones onto the laptops, where all it does is represent a district phone number. It protects the privacy of the administrator or teacher or staff member, and it shows just a united phone number with the district. It also knocks out that cost of having to pay for either POTS, landlines, or cell phones. And then with NAC, we're seeing you've had this exponential increase in devices pushed on you without an exponential increase in staff. And in many cases, staff has declined. So being able to automate the device security on the onboarding is crucial. And of course, our FortiGates, especially with the remote learning, the VPN access and split tunneling, that's our constant. That's what we're known for, and that is just growing and growing. But DDoS took a lot of schools down at the start of school, still taking schools down. And when the schools go down, you can't get the students online, you lose that average daily attendance. And that is painful because, for instance, Baltimore County went down with a ransomware attack. They weren't able to get students online, 115,000 students times, let's say, 4 days at $40-something and change. They lost actually a little over $4 million a day. It doesn't matter how big your school is, that kind of loss leaves a mark. So with COVID relief versus E-rate you just wrapped up, but we're still going to talk about it. One of the things with the COVID money and all three waves, it can be used now in 15 wide areas of latitude. So modernization, school infrastructure build up, HVAC systems, things like that. I need to change that slide. And technology is specifically listed. Student devices to network needs are eligible. Whatever's required to get that IP packet safely and securely and at high speed so you're not a clog from that device out to the internet and its desired location and back is eligible. So you can use funds for all Fortinet solutions. Again, second round was 4 times more than the first round, and the new third round is 8 times more than the first round. Understand that 99.9% of K12 has not touched your second CARES Act funding. So if somebody says all the money is allocated, that is absolutely not true. And it's not that somebody may be not telling you the truth. It's because they don't understand the amount of funding that is coming in these waves, because frankly, you are all too busy being in the arena, keeping business of education and the process of education afloat. So you don't have time to go track all this funding. And that's why we're partnering ISquared and us. We're both moving forward to try to help with this. And we want to make sure that you get your fair share. And really, depending on what you need long-term, 25 to 35% of that budget is not out of line, especially if you can justify it, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And excuse me, voice is wearing out. So one of the things that is crucial, and this is for K12, is the FCC did a gift rule waiver through June 30th. What that does, it allows you to mitigate any of you used to be able to do things for 14 days. That's out of the way. You can, whatever, if it's a hot spot, if it's networking gear, improved capacity, you can either receive as gift or as loans. And what we have done in hundreds and hundreds of schools across the country is really, this is where our partners and ISquared is perfect. They're set up to already do this. In fact, we're going to push forward about a meeting going forward where, frankly, whatever is your biggest pain, your biggest problem, we can go ahead and plug in the solution without any obligation to you. Using this rule, you can then determine, is this meet and exceed our expectations? Does it solve our problems? Because the two biggest things in education, back when I was there, same way, was there a need and was there funding? Funding is there. You clearly have needs because this new hybrid learning and the pedagogy and delivery method is not going to decrease. And in fact, the demands on the network and the demands on teaching are going to increase in the hybrid model, the remote learning model. And with spikes coming in COVID and things like that, you've got to be able to flip on a dime, whether you're on campus, off campus, hybrid, A/B schedule, whatever. So this allows you to figure out what you need. You can plug it in. And then once it solves that problem, you can then work with your administration. You don't have to do E-rate. Thank the Lord. You can do local procurement and you can use state contracts, mini bids, whatever your local procurement. And then you can just go ahead and start the purchase process using the CARES funds once you show the need to the administration. And if it's going to take a headache off of your team, frankly, that's justified. So use this gift waiver rule, not only to figure out your immediate needs, but we want to use this funding because it's one-time funding for your immediate, your near, and your long-term needs so that you end up having a $0 impact on your local budget and a $0 OPEX for at least the next 3, possibly 4 years on your network needs and solutions and things like that. We'll talk about more. But think about that is if you can absolutely, and you can absolutely use the money for this, but if you can use the federal funding to have to make sure there's $0 spent with you and your local network or your local budget. And by the way, with E-rate, we're going to talk about that too, where you use federal funding, both for the E-rate portion and for your match. Use the federal dollars, you pay for everything up front, and we'll talk about that strategy in a minute, but it comes back where through USAC, where you would then get that, your percentage would then come back and you can put that back in locally. So in essence, the feds pay for the whole thing. So that is a strategy that is key. A second key is USAC and the FCC. The FCC is allowed and USAC has processed the ability. So even if you bought stuff in 2020 before the pandemic, because you always have to do it a year ahead with E-rate, and you've got equipment in, you used to not be able to move that equipment. Now you can move the equipment. So this will enable you to right-size your current and future needs. So let's say you bought something in 2019, 2018, 17, but it's now clogging your network. It's now a problem and not a solution. You can move that piece of equipment or that group of equipment, put it somewhere else in your network, out of LAN, wherever, and then you can put in the right size equipment and solution that you need. As long as you document it, that it's doing a function, the lights are on, that it's reporting whatever. If it's access points, the ABs that are no longer cutting it, and you need to go to the latest version, Fortinet, you can take those APs, take them out and put them in TK and pre-K, who are all on tablets now too, but with much less traffic, and allow those to work there, and then right-size your APs, right-size your switches, all of your network needs. Frankly, if you work with your administration using a combination of CARES and your E-rate long-term, you can actually forklift upgrade what you need to do and get it to where you're headed now for the next 5 years or so with the network that you always hoped you'd have. So it's not, now is the time to be able to, and it's not just E-rate eligible equipment. So it's much broader than that. So you have to stop thinking E-rate for your network with CARES. You need to think about all of your network and IT ed tech needs. That's the bigger scope that you need to be aware of. So being able to move the equipment out of the way is key to going to the next step. And so with that, bears and cares. So let's say you won or you put in your E-rate form 2021, you need that project sooner rather than later. Well, you can use the Form 472 BEAR form, Build Entity Application Reimbursement. Less than 8% annually use that form. But now with the CARES funding, it gives you the money to be able to pay for that up front which is what you have to do with bears. But that means you can start your project as soon as April 1st. You don't have to wait till your funding commitment decision letter. And with CARES money, since it's federal, no local impact on your budget. So you pay for it up front, and then you go through the rabies shots of E-rate, and you get that whole thing processed, and you make sure that you use federal funds for the overall project, including your local match. When you get the reimbursement back from USAC, including your local match, that money you put back into your budget, including your local match, which you never would have gotten back before. So let's say it's $1 million project for easy math, because I'm not very bright. And you're a 80% district, so you had to pay 20%, so $200K. So you pay the full $1 million up front, and when it comes back, you get the 80%. But because you didn't have to spend your local money, you saved that $200K because you used it in the feds. So it's a great way to be able this time around for 2021, and you'll be able to do it for 2022. Use the E-rate funding, but make sure that you don't pay a dime for it, that it all comes from the federal monies. And then, but that's where understanding the deadlines and the dates is going to be crucial. And that's where we all can partner with you and have direct one-on-one discussions and planning sessions. And that's really what we want to do next. So ISquared, what we recommend and what we're doing with them, we've already set up several of these, is we want to create a team approach with you. Because it's not E-rate, you don't have to worry about the Form 470 and the RFP and people getting involved. You can actually use a trusted partner to sit down and bring in all of our engineering and all of our IT help to help plan this out and to do proof of concepts using that gift waiver rule to find out what your needs now, what your needs in the near, what your needs in the far, and then put that plan on paper electronically, and then also work with ISquared, and we'll get you budgetary numbers that you'll be able to go forward with. And then what we are seeing work across the country, we work with your teams, we put that team together, we put that plan together, and then if you go asking for the funding with a comprehensive plan of attack, with a business education business plan, where it shows what the need is, how the funding is going to be used, what's crucial about it, what happens if you don't. And by the way, if the network goes down, which is everybody's nightmare, and you can't get those students online, that is a massive loss of funding for every day it's down, which is in the back of every superintendent's mind. So you bring this case together, and then we're finding it a much more successful meeting when we present that. And we will, ISquared and we will go with you and walk you through that and go with you to the meetings, whether virtually or on site, doesn't matter. If you need support, we're going to be there. But using engineers to detail the potential needs just beyond what you have to deal with every day, because you're in the arena, you're fighting this every day, and sometimes it's hard to be able to look down the road. And that's where having experienced eyes, ears, and hands and minds can help you plan to use this money long term. And that's frankly what you have to do. You're not used to getting this funding. You're not used to having to pursue it. And that's very, very hard. And that's why we're going to be beside you and walk in and make that happen. So what we recommend is scheduling a meeting, and we'll get with you, we'll Zoom it. I'm down in California. Once we're going to be flying again, we'll be all over the place. But we all as a team will work with you to move forward with this. And so with cybersecurity for education, so the security fabric is going to be crucial. By the way, you're going to get a copy of these slides, but you need to deal with endpoint security, breach prevention, incident response. You need to be able to have all of these. And frankly, under E-rate, part of the firewall access points, switches, routers, caching, that's it. The network management side, that's why you need to make sure and use CARES, these three buckets, to get everything you need beyond that. Because quite frankly, the FCC and the E-rate program has been negligent with regards to cybersecurity to date. They have been lobbied. We're hoping with the new administration and the new FCC acting chairman that they're going to allow more security and make next-gen firewalls the base level. We're part of an FCC petition with COSIN and S8 and the Shelby and 65 other organizations pushing this forward. But in the meantime, you can't wait for E-rate. You use these CARES monies to protect you throughout your whole entire network. Use the security fabric from the end user device all the way through. And this, is 100% federal match, so zero impact on your local budget. Everything you see on the screen is what ISSQUARED and Fortinet provides that can be used with this funding. So there is this is the opportunity, now's the time, now's the place to have long in the weeds, detailed discussions in the weeds about what you need completely to secure, to increase productivity, increase the speed of the network and the management of the network. Everything that you need to future-proof going into this hyper transformation and going into year 2 of it, the money is now there. You just need to have the plan and then execute on that plan. Also, we are putting out for schools, one of our CISOs, Renee Turum, has written a book specifically for lower grade level students on being cyber safe, and that'll be on here as well. We just released this out today, so you're the first webinar that we're discussing this with. And so this is going to be made available, especially with kids. It's actually done very well, and we like it a lot. So with that, I babbled on forever. Is there any questions?
Hey, Jeff, looks like we have a couple questions here. First one is, does digital divide funds go primarily to the carrier ISPs?
So it is done as you're going to use the E-rate program. So that $50 a month will be a credit towards the ISP. There's also going to be, currently there's a $100 credit. They're talking about how to possibly mold that and change that to make it more effective. But yeah, the 50 would go to the provider. However, the school districts, if they want to use their CARES monies to be, and they're also talking about using a small portion of this, of the EBB, Emergency Broadband Plan, to be able to broadcast out or do mesh networks or whatever in your local neighborhoods. It just depends. We're seeing rural schools teaming with local cellular carriers and doing shared towers so that the school as the anchor institution is allowing a tower to be put on or near school property and then sharing and using that. And that's allowing a lot more flexibility. So there's a lot of things you can do. By the way, this is just tip of the iceberg. The infrastructure plan that'll be announced this week and several other initiatives that we're a part of will be coming out, and it's going to include more funding for infrastructure, including broadband, and schools as anchor institutions are going to be key to that, as well as state and local government. So this is just the beginning, and making sure that you're connected with your ISquared team, then do that because they're going to have regular updates for you. We'll hold more of these webinars.
Thanks for that explanation. One more question here for you, Jeff. For equipment transfers under the new E-rate rules, does the removed gear need to be documented that is put back into production or not? Or can you explain that process a little more in depth?
Sure. Now, the good thing is you don't have to turn in the documentation to the FCC or to USAC. What you do have to do is, for audit purposes, have it internal to you, have a document that you're keeping that's saying we're moving firewall ABC from the NOC or the data center. We're now moving that to site 123 and then plug it in, and then whatever function it has, reporting, passively reporting, whatever, just have that filled in so that if you do get an E-rate audit or a special review, you'll be able to point to, hey, the lights are still moving. It's still doing a function. It just was unable to do the function once we had to pivot. So just keep that information available, but you don't have to turn it in the FCC, only if they ask for it as part of a review or an audit.
here's a hypothetical question. If a district used CARES for all of a possible E-rate project and USAC does not fund the CARES, does CARES still cover the total project? Or if funded, does USAC simply go back into the general fund?
So let's say we did that $1 million project, you paid for it up front, and for whatever reason, USAC denied your $1 million request, actually $800K of the million, because the 200 would be your match. You can then just write it all off to CARES, and it's still just the federal funding, not your local dollar. If they do fund it and it comes through, then all of the reimbursement goes back into your local budget. You don't have to send it back to the feds. So if you're successful with your E-rate, then you've used federal funds to not only pay for it all, but cover your match, which saves your local budget. And then if it isn't, then you simply use CARES to cover that eligible cost without any added expense to the district. It's a win-win. Ultimately, you want both, but it's a win-win. In fact, a lot of schools this year, it looked like it was going to be a record year for CARES or for E-rate Category 2 till the second wave was announced. Many schools weren't expecting that. And then the Category 2 requests dropped like a rock in the last 35 days of the window for the Form 470s because they realized they could use CARES. Now, still only you saw 39% of all eligible entities used it, despite that they could. That actually ticked up from 31% right there at the end of the E-rate window. So they wanted to save their E-rate for later. And there's a definite justification to do that. And that's why having these meetings and having the schools meet with your teams to do this plan right is key, because what you don't want is hitting the end of these budget, at the end of these years with CARES, 22 and 23, and possibly 24 with excess budget and panic buy. That's been the historic way excess budget has been spent in education because you never want to give a nickel back to the feds. But that's why having that plan is so crucial to making sure you do it the right way.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Jeff, for your time today. Really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who was able to join with us. We'll be following up with a recording for anyone who is unable to attend.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.